Welcome back. In a moment, we'll continue our discussion of the fallout from the Greek financial crisis. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Japanese troops carrying out UN peacekeeping operations in South Sudan will now also conduct rescue missions in the country. The new mandate will apply from November the 20th and comes amid UN concerns of genocide in the country. German police have launched raids on properties, including mosques, offices and homes throughout the country, as the government cracks down on the True Religion organisation. The government has banned the group for trying to recruit fighters for Daesh. And water rations are now being imposed in Bolivia following a severe drought in the landlocked country. According to the Environment Ministry, half the country and more than 125,000 families are suffering from a lack of water. Now, let's return to fallout from the financial crisis in Greece and look at the organisation at the heart of the bailouts, the IMF. The International Monetary Fund's own watchdog this summer criticised it for failing to spot the scale of the problem, making over-optimistic forecasts and appearing to treat Europe differently to the rest of the world. The International Monetary Fund was conceived in 1944, but formally came into existence in 1945 as part of an international post-war economic agreement. At its inception, the fund had 29 contributing member states. France, reeling from the aftermath of the Second World War, was the first country to borrow from the fund.
The economic emergency is worldwide and can only be dealt with on an international basis.
Let us therefore take counsel together, each with a full sense of the gravity of this historic hour. The tides of fate are fast running out. We must be prompt and resolute to seize what may be our final opportunity.
In the modern era, the fund serves three purposes. First, anticipating economic crises by monitoring global economic and financial developments. Second, advising or providing funding to countries experiencing balance of payment problems. And third, providing technical assistance and training to member states. Currently, the fund boasts 189 contributing member states and is working with 42 governments across the world. Most lending agreements are with African countries, but the fund is also offering assistance to countries in the Middle East and Southern Europe. However, the actions of the IMF are never far from criticism. Decision-making is dominated by wealthy countries because voting power is determined by each member's investment. The US pays in the most. As a result, they have a greater say. Conditions attached to loans can include reducing government spending, raising taxes, public sector wage cuts, and a currency devaluation. These are called structural adjustment policies and are felt more acutely by the poorest in a country.
Our loans to countries experiencing difficulties, our loans are conditional upon various requirements, but all of them aim at restoring stability, restoring growth, and debt sustainability.
The fund takes a neoliberal approach to economics, routinely encouraging deregulation of financial markets and asking countries to cut corporation tax and weaken labour laws. Valuable public assets like land and infrastructure are also sold off at low prices. Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Angelos Angelou from the London School of Economics, and the economist Vicky Pryce is still with us as well. Angelos Angelou, the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis once said that they were doing the equivalent of waterboarding in economic terms to Greece, and he called for Paul Thompson, the director of European Affairs, to quit. Does he have a point?
Well, I mean, the IMF has done a number of mistakes in Greece. To start with, their projections were quite over-optimistic. So in that sense, Greece actually lost a lot of benchmark, both in terms of economic status, but also in terms of structural reforms. Having said that, they also done other mistakes in the sense that they overestimated the capacity of the Greek public sector to actually implement those reforms. So, I think that a very common criticism we hear about the IMF is that, it adopts a kind of cookie-cutter approach. It applies the same policies in every country. So I think, they didn't really take into consideration the very special characteristics that the Greek public sector and the Greek economy has. So, he has a point that some mistakes have been done.
And basic mistakes, it seems, in terms of paperwork wasn't widely propagated. You know, as if this is some kind of secret fiefdom was going on within the IMF just to sort Greece out without telling anyone else what they were doing.
That's absolutely right. I mean, you know, they had essentially to bend the rules for the first Greek bailout. So, you know, one of the most basic rules to get IMF lending is to have like a sustainable debt for the medium term. You know, according to the IMF estimations, that was not the case in Greece. So what they did is they added a provision just for the Greek case to say that if you face a risk of financial spillover, then, you know, you can get the loan anyways.
They made up stuff, basically.
Essentially, you know, they had to bend the rules.
Is this the IMF you recognise? You know of old, Vicky?
Well, no, but of course at the time it all looked terribly, terribly dangerous, and Greece, being a small country, looked like it might bring the whole financial sector down all across the world, which was quite an extraordinary position to find yourself in. But yes, I think they bend the rules without any doubt early on by saying that if they didn't lend to the Greeks, despite the fact that debt looked really rather high, there could indeed be this financial contagion all across, so there would be a domino effect.
So the means justified the ends, or
yes.
the end justified the means.
And in a way, though, that could have been right at the time, but obviously one would have had to have had a very, very close look at what the implications of the conditions that they were putting on the Greeks would be. If they had come and said, right, we will lend, we want to avoid spillovers, but actually our conditionality will be such that it will allow growth in the economy, and their forecast would have been slightly better in terms of what the impact of those policies would have been, then we might have had a slightly different result, and perhaps they would have been justified in what they did. But I still think Greece would probably have defaulted back in 2010, and none of this would have happened.
So do we have to give the IMF at least some good marks for helping where nobody else would? I mean, they were the only game in town back then, weren't they, really?
I mean, you know, they were actually brought by the EUs because they had the expertise and the know-how to implement a bailout.
Yeah.
Also, you know, we should give them some credit for actually being the only one advocating for an early debt relief, and I think that's very important. So, you know, I think they do deserve some credit, but having said that, you know, the fact that they didn't get into account the growth projections, they need to have, like, you know, growth dynamics in Greece, I think it was a problem, you know, and they didn't fix it.
Do you think that the IMF members are going to have to take some pain here? I mean, there's various euphemisms get put, a haircut and all this kind of stuff. Basically, they're going to lose money. They're not going to get it all back. What do you think, Vicky?
Well, there are different bits of that debt. If you look at what it is that Greece has actually borrowed, some of it has come directly from the IMF, and others bits have come from individual countries, particularly the EU countries.
Yes.
So the IMF is, in fact, being paid back almost in full. And a lot of the extra borrowing that the Greece have had to do recently has been to repay the IMF, which is...
So they're debtor number one, are they?
Yeah,
they
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and it is, the great crisis has always been, are the Greeks going to be able to get enough money from one source to pay back the money they owe to a different source? And I think that has ridiculed the whole process, because basically all the Greeks have done is borrowed in order to pay back other debt, rather than any of it, or at least a very, very small part of it, in fact, going into the economy itself. Bits of it to recapitalize the banking sector, but a lot of it has just basically gone to repay debt, which is ridiculous because you just end up with more debt burden as you borrow more to repay.
Suppose, of me taking out another credit card to pay off the credit card.
Exactly.
In personal debt management, that's a very bad idea. But Greece is having to do that right now, aren't they? Until somebody forgives them and maybe gives them a bit more time. I mean, one stat I read that by 2060, Greece, if they head on the same trajectory as they are today, will be paying about half their GDP in debt repayments. Well, that's no way any government... They can't run a government like that. You can't run a country like that, can you?
No, I mean, and I guess one other problem is that the IMF programs usually have a time frame of 3 years. You know, that's a very short time to actually,
Yes.
you know, initiate growth and repay your debt. If they had the opportunity at least to have like a more long-term programs, to actually have the opportunity to smooth out the social repercussions of the programs, then maybe, you would have a chance. But 3 years program, I mean, for a country like Greece, I think it's too short.
You've reinvented the Greek economic situation in your Greekonomics book. You've coined a new term.
Yes.
Do you see a step-by-step approach to how Greece comes out of this?
Well, yes, but first of all, we have to remember that the IMF itself is not involved at present in the third bailout, the latest bailout the Greeks have got. It wants to satisfy itself that there is proper debt relief in the future. So that's good news in some ways, bad news in others. But what it means is that there is a process now which is being set to achieve some sort of debt relief. The second thing I think to bear in mind is that if indeed we do achieve this, even if there's a lengthening, which already happened, of maturities or lowering of interest rates, so that we don't know quite what would happen in the future on that, what that does is it reduces the net present value of the debt. In other words, the debt on your books should actually be considerably lower than was the case before. And if that is properly understood, which I'm sure the European Central Bank understands and others do, including the IMF, then Greece will be in a much better position once those negotiations are over to be able to go back and borrow again, or to really start focusing on growth, which I think is the way to do it. Yes, I think there is a step, but we mustn't forget, when we look at the IMF, since this was the point of this part of the programme, they have to learn from their mistakes. And let's hope they never do that sort of thing again.
Indeed so. We'll leave it there. Vicky Pryce, thank you very much indeed. Angelos Angelou, thank you too. We end now with our Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. The steel arches of a 270-metre bridge have come together in their final completion over the Lancang River in China. Each half was connected after 2 vertical turns, and it forms part of a railway in southeast China's Yunnan province. The railway is expected to be connected with Myanmar upon its completion, creating a much welcome bridge between the bordering nations. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.